Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel featuring four highly esteemed speakers who have deeply engaged with Tapta's work in their roles as researchers, curators, or artists. I'll present them to you. We have in our midst Anne Coxon, art historian and freelance curator, and you were long associated with Tate Modern, where you curated numerous exhibitions, including those of Annie Albers and most recently Magdalena Abakanowicz. And you're currently pursuing a PhD project on international textile art from the 1960s and 1970s at University College London. So really an expert in the field. Just like our next guest, Marta Kowalewska, art historian and chief curator at the Central Museum of Textiles in Łódź. We also have among us Veronica Janssens, artist and former student and assistant of Tapta, and Billet, artist, lecturer, and researcher at Lucas School of Arts in Brussels. Thank you so much, all four of you, for being here and having graciously accepted our invitation to share your insights on Tapta's remarkable oeuvre, which has, until recently, remained relatively undiscovered. In this panel, we will explore the evolution of Tapta's work, tracing its journey from her earliest known creations, the woven pieces from the 1960s, exemplified by her contribution to the 4th International Biennale of Tapestry in Lausanne, to her pivotal transition in the early 1980s to neoprene as a new medium, highlighted by her second and final participation in the Lausanne Biennial with the rubber curtain elastic structure. These two moments have been presented and discussed already this morning in our lectures, but let's focus once again on what exactly unfolded between those two pieces, both of which could be described as wall-wide curtains, similar in scale and function, yet starkly contrasting in terms of opacity, density, fragility, texture, and more. So I'd like to address my first question to Anne and Marta. As both of you have so insightfully described, we witness a general evolution between these milestone moments from two-dimensionality to three-dimensionality, from traditional wall-bound tapestries to flexible sculptures, as Tapta called them. This is a development that Tapta shares with other, more internationally renowned contemporary artists like Magdalena Abakanowicz, Jagoda Buić, Sheila Hicks, and Leonard Tawney, to name just a few. Given your deep expertise in the field of fiber art, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you consider as or to be Tapta's most significant contribution to this domain. Where do you think she truly discovered her démarche, her personal artistic approach, and how do you perceive it?
First of all, thank you. Thank you, Liesbeth. And just to go back over the first part of your question, to say that this development from tapestry on the wall to sculptural object away from the wall, out in space, and eventually to environment that we encounter in relation to the whole of the space and of our person, our being as viewers. This trajectory was something that was outlined by the art critic and writer who was observing what was happening at the Lausanne Tapestry Biennials, the name of André Coenzi, who published his book in 1973, The New Tapestry. So he identified these three trends of mural, spatial, and environmental tapestry, looking back over the previous biennials. The Lausanne Biennial had started in 1962 and was really set up to profile international tapestry. And the remit had been very much more about what we might think of as the traditional tapestry, as created at the French manufactories, the Gobelin tapestry, which hangs on the wall, very much a wall hanging. And then the narrative, the history of this development of the Lausanne Biennials is that some of the younger artists, and particularly those from Eastern Europe, from Poland, Magdalena Abakanowicz was the most prominent of those, started to take their tapestries off the wall. So in 1969, which is the first biennial that Tapta was showing her work at that point, Magdalena Abakanowicz was showing this big red hanging piece, the big red Abakan, which has become very well known. It's now in the Tate's collection. Out in three-dimensional space, and the rules had begun to expand what artists were doing. They were seeing themselves very much as artists, as creators of tapestries who were weaving the works themselves. They weren't sending it out for somebody else to translate or to interpret. It wasn't being woven in the studio setting in the same way, and they were improvising at the loom. So this is the context into which Tapta was coming and into which she was showing her work. I mean, Marta can speak more about this as well. Marta, would you like to say something about that? And then I'd like to get on to answering the second part of the question about maybe what we might think of as being Tapta's actual, what would be her individual contribution? Maybe you have thoughts on that.
Okay, so at the beginning, of course, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be there and to meet all together today. Yes, and maybe I would like to add something at the beginning, that the artists who developed the language of tapestry, who invited new meaning of tapestry, it was a generation after Second War. And I think that at that time, especially at that time, artists tried to find a new language to express the new word, the word who was destroyed, absolutely. And I think that textile medium, it was one of the best one, because they were always very close to our lives, to life of people at the beginning to the end. So I think that it's quite important context because of Tapta's biographies. And I think that when I look at her artistic path, I think that it's interesting that she had very different backgrounds. As I told, this traumatizing childhood. Then she got education in Western tradition, Western European tradition, and then went to Congo. So I think that there were three different backgrounds. So I think that it's very, very important to see her work in different contexts, like a fruit of the diverse educations and inspirations. But of course, I agree with Anne. Thank you for all you said. I was very surprised when I read that Tapta told that the first time she discovered the new languages of textile, it was her first participated in Biennale in '69. I was surprised because, as Anne mentioned, the first Biennale the first Biennale took place in '62, and the first commissage, André Quenzi, organized a very big exhibition of Polish tapestries, Polish artists. And these exhibitions were shown in Germany, Holland, the Netherlands, and even in '67 in Brussels. So I think that it's nearly impossible that Tapta didn't see it. And so, yes, I think that she was a very, very important part of this movement.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Marta. It's interesting, isn't it, what artists say about their practice and the way that they remember things, and when you look at the historical facts, they don't always match up. But this is, it obviously was something that had an impact for her at that time. And I think what I was going to say to answer the second part of Liesbeth's question. I was trying to think about, how might Tapta's individual contribution have differed from artists like Abakanowicz or Jagoda Buić. And I think, there are obvious ways of looking at, the way that she developed her use of the coiling rope, and the kind of techniques that she was using. But those are the things that I suppose interest me less. Then I was thinking really that she probably really embraced this idea of the environment and of the ability of the viewer, the participant, I suppose we should call them, to really interact with the works a lot more than the other figures. So we know, for example, that people were able to touch and to move Abakanowicz's sculptures, her abakans, originally, although that's no longer the case. Now they're in museum collections and they have a certain value. But they weren't in quite the same, they weren't designed in quite the same way as Tapta's environments. So, the tent for chatting, or the seats that she created, these are things that are really about providing a kind of a structure, something flexible and soft that is formed specifically to accommodate the body and the bodies of people and the interactions between people. So I think what really interests me is how she spoke about, for example, the tent for chatting as being a kind of a prop for a social situation or a social space. And that social connection seems to be something really particular to her work that's very important in characterizing what she contributed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would like to add only that a lot of artists like Abakanowicz adapt and expand to the space. They try to create a new word. But I think that when I look at Tapta's objects, yeah, I'm sorry that I come back again to the war, but I think that she tried to create a safe space, a space. First, I'm thinking about cocoons. It's like a women wombs that you can get inside and feel safe. But of course, the tent, it's a different space. It's a space of dialogue. But it's still, people build tents to hide. So I think that it's another space than like Abakanowicz created, because Abakanowicz was more expanse, so annexed space. I think that Tapta would like to invite people to hide, to make dialogues, to create the discussion. So yeah, I see like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Marta. And because this, as you said, this is a generation who were traumatized by, what they experienced with Abakanowicz and with Tapta, what they experienced in Warsaw in the war, and this aerial bombardment, to find a safe space, to create a soft space, a cocoon, literally, in Tapta's case, literally a cocoon in which you would be held, you would be contained. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let's maybe ask on Veronica Janssens. On Veronica, you were a student of Tapta from 1976, I think, until 1980, more or less, and later served as her assistant together with Monika Droste, another Polish artist, actually, between 1979 and 87. Maybe to begin, could you share how you first encountered Tapta? What led you to choose her as your mentor, especially since she was a new professor at La Cambre at the time? And how did the opportunity to become her assistant arise?
Thank you, Liesbeth. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to take part of this panel. Then my first encounter with her work was at the time when I was wondering about the various possibilities for studying art and where to turn which atelier. At an important event and I was working as a student for the Jubilee of the King, and Tapta was invited to make an installation. And it was the first time that I discovered Vas's installation by Tapta, a presentation of work from the mid-70s family of the flexible space. It was really huge, and I was moved and attracted by those proposals, which opened up more experimental and resolutely contemporary perspective, gigantic break with the traditional textile art. Also, those works showed a great deal of sensitivity, the question of immersion and radicalism and new language. And luckily, at the same time, the director of La Cambre had the intention to engage Tapta to replace the person who ran the tapestry atelier. And then we had the pleasure to meet us together at my entrance exam, which was her first students' auditions. And I always remember her friendly, lively, and encouraging gaze. Still today, it's fantastic. In her program, she must certainly mention the possibility of working and thinking about the architecture and the space itself. I can't really confirm, but I have this intuition that it was part of the project of the atelier. And I had the intuition after discovering her work and meeting her that she would allow us a lot of freedom, encourage personal project, and also our autonomy. The following year, my friend Monika Droste, who just arrived from Warsaw, also started to study Tapta's atelier. Every week, Tapta's organized a collective debate around each other project, and on certain occasion organized collective project and also project in the public space, which was a very nice challenge for a young student. And we got on very well together. Tapta was always close to share her knowledge, her rigor, her dynamic, her intuition about how to develop a project. Tapta needed an assistant, and they knew that Monika and I need money. So she asked us to work for her, first year during the holidays and later on a more daily basis. And it was a very intense period for us. We worked in the family home of Tapta. Tapta would often create the model. She showed us the technique to follow, and we would create and install the full-scale project. We talk a lot each other, and Tapta shared her commitment, her enthusiasm and feeling about artistic proposal. She shared her necessity to translate tension, energy, strength with her work. She was all her life sensitive, positive, radical, resolute, engaged, and provocative. The collaboration with Monika Droste in the context of our work as student and also majority Tapta's assistant for the production of our sculpture, enable us to spend long days exchanging, talking and developing our project. And the result was a collaborative artistic proposal with a specific vocabulary. This work were the result of conversation during these working days in the studio, long day. And in the meantime, later we received a grant from the Fondation from La Tapisserie, who was one the initiator of this foundation, which gave us the more financial independence. And we continue with our personal project, but we're still very close with Tapta, who support us with many attention and curiosity, enthusiasm about our project. When she moved to Boulevard du Midi, we didn't work with her anymore.
Yeah. No, it's very nice to hear. I think that exactly those installations that you just mentioned, Anne and Marta, that it were exactly these works that had motivated Veronica to apply for Tapta studio at La Cambre. So there must have been also then now still, but an attraction from these installations, like a sensorial attraction, very tactile also. And also something else I was thinking is that it's so nice that not only in her installations, like Tent for Chatting, that facilitate conversations, that apparently also in her studio, where you were together very closely to Monica and to Tapta, that also there was a room for conversation, like it's facilitated the conversation that, you know, brought new ideas and were a fertile ground to new creativity. So I think it's a very nice parallel, and to see how this also not only worked in the exhibition space with visitors, but also in the studio, the close environment of the studio. Thank you very much for sharing this. So you indeed started from the scale models that Tapta made on her own, I suppose. She conceived them, and then she presented them to you, and you had to make them in large format. Should I? Yeah.
Yes, she learned us how to do. Also, we made the rope ourselves for her. You know, the rope, and then we start to build the artwork. And she let us free to working and discuss together.
Yeah. Okay. So sometimes I imagine that when you were working on something, you know, you encountered questions like, how should we do this technically? Because the material is so important. I have the feeling, not only the feeling, I've read it in some interviews also, that she really started from the materials, really.
Absolutely. She starts from the material, and she manipulates the material to well understand the possibility of the movement, of the fluidity. She questioned also the color. Color was an important aspect too in her work. And then we produce the color, the rope on the factory. It will make the color or not, and then we have a nice place to elaborate the work. In a way, it was not so complicated to do. She basis on a scale model. It was in a way easy to reproduce in bigger size.
Yet some are very, very large. Yes. I imagine it wasn't so easy sometimes, also very heavy often.
Yes, it's something very physical, but also, you know, like a body, because it's heavy, but it's move all the time.
And you were 3 strong women to handle these cords, so I can see how that worked. But maybe going further on this very important aspect of materiality in her work, something that is true for many artworks, of course, but I think is especially pronounced here, is that photographic reproductions of Tapta's work offer only a faint reflection of their true essence. To truly appreciate them, one must experience them in person, their weight, texture, volume, tactility, only come to life when encountered directly. And I'd like to address this question to Greet, as an artist deeply engaged with materiality yourself. How did you experience Tapta sculptures and, I would say, their phenomenological appearance?
Well, hi everybody, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I think if we speak about our phenomenological appearance, I think Tapta's work is immersive, or gives us a really immersive experience. Soft material, but there where Morris is not processing or manipulating his felt, Tapta really processes her soft material into a sculpture, and even in her weavings that starts to be flat and two-dimensional, there is a moment where she starts to twist the woven panels so that they become spatial. And a beautiful example is Twisted Structure she made in 1973. And by twisting those woven panels, she opens it up entirely. She opens the piece up, and because of that, the light can fall in. So you could say she also starts weaving with light and the space as well. And also the way she uses the dégradé into the color in this piece reinforces that speciality, I think. And regarding to texture, the use of those natural fabrics, and even the fact that Veronica mentions as well, that some of the cords they used were made by her and her assistant, really makes you to want to touch the work. And because of her very diverse manipulation or processing of the material, she becomes a very interesting texture. And even in the work that is monochrome, like Falling Knots from 1973, and in this work, she uses different kinds of cords and threads, but of the same color, that gives a very delicate and unusual structure, I think. And it's very interesting for me, and it's also still very relevant and contemporary, I think. And regarding to tactility, I want to use an anecdote. Like every visitor I saw standing in front of the cocoons, they told me, I really want to crawl in. So even the sculptures she made that were not supposed to enter, like flexible space, people really feel the urge to crawl in. Mm-hmm. And regarding to volume, I think it's wonderful how she can bring some volume into a soft and rather fine material by processing it in a very particular way. She really succeeds in finding sculptural solutions for making a two-dimensional and soft material three-dimensional. And she does that by making knots or twisting the woven panels, but also by weaving her material around harder shapes like she does in Flexible Horizons, where she uses rain pipes and wood. And by doing that, she really succeeds in making a steady sculpture out of soft material. Mm-hmm. And even the colors she used in all those things are also very interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's true. It reminds me also what you told about the cocoons. That was, I saw a little kid that told his mother or father when seeing the cocoons, I want to crawl into it and read a book in there. Yeah, this very cozy environment. And Greet, maybe you can expand a little bit more on Tapta's transition from two-dimensional to three-dimensional work, particularly this exploration and mastery of space. Could you?
Yeah. Like Tapta starts weaving in the late 60s, but already very early you see the use of other materials than threads. she uses, for example, in wall fabric #2, she made in 67 pieces of brass. Like she's already then looking for possibilities to jump out of the 2 dimensions. And a bit later, we see in the work Falling Knots again from 70, a work in which she's not weaving anymore, but really sculpting with the soft material by making the knots into the thick cords she uses. And then we have the cocoons she made in 73, where she really succeeds in sculpting with a soft, rather 2-dimensional object, and she creates a 3-dimensional piece. And again, with an anecdote, I helped hanging those 2 cocoons in wheels. And it's by helping and hanging them, I started to realize that she must have had an enormous feeling of speciality, because the pieces, the cocoons, are incredibly heavy. And we had to lift them up with 3 people. And which made me realize that Tapta, a rather small woman, knew exactly what she was doing and what she was making. It's not just a random form or a structure. And by lifting her pieces, I could really feel her enormous gift of speciality in her thinking. And I also see that in her small models. I really see that she's sculpting with the material itself. I also think that she was not making a lot of sketches, but she really sketched with the material itself. And there I see a difference, for example, with Magdalena Abakanowicz. Like the Abakans, they are still woven flat pieces who are folded into the space. And yeah, she was trained as a painter, Abakanowicz, and I still see that in her pieces. So they exist of flat weavings folded into more dimensional pieces that she hangs into the space. But the basis of them are still flat and 2-dimensional compared to Tapta's cocoons, who are really 3-dimensional from a start, I think.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Anne and Marta, who know the work of Abakanowicz very well, would you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
I think that Abakanowicz, at the beginning, she thought about this forms like 3-dimension, and maybe yeah, it's true that the separate element were flat, and then they stitches. But I think that at the beginning, in her mind, it was to create a 3-dimension shape, and for Abakanowicz was very important not to treat object like a separate, yeah. So she was thinking about exhibition. Every exhibition was a separate project. And sometimes she even changed shapes because for her it was very important to create a narration, a dialogues, and to combine and to put works in a center way. But technically, yeah, it's right that at the beginning they were just a flat element that then she created 3-dimension forms.
I just started thinking though that even a flat weave, even what we might refer to as a wall hanging or a flat weaving, or whatever we're talking about as being the starting point of a tapestry or a textile work, even those, because weaving is structural, and because there's always this interrelation, there's always the warp and the weft thread and the weaving in and out and up and down. In a way, isn't it always a 3-dimensional activity? It's in a different way to applying paint onto a surface. Creating a textile of any sort, even if it has a front, ends up with a front and a back, and it hangs against the wall. But just in creating that, you're always having to build something in a way. So it's a structural activity instead of applying something onto.
Yeah, there's something in it, I think. Also, when you imagine the production at the loom, which is a very 3-dimensional instrument, where threads coming from several sides to make this flat. It's some kind of more voluminous practice too. Yeah. Continuing talking about this materiality of Tapta's work, Anne, I want to ask you, because in your text that is published in our book, maybe some advertisement is is possible here. You describe Tapta's practice as sculpting feelings, a phrase that beautifully captures her work, I think. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on this concept? Is it something that, again, stands out to you as exceptional compared to other practices? I wondered also, is it a deeply personal expression according to you, or might it also be viewed through a political lens, maybe in relation to what Marta mentioned already several times about the experience of the Second World War? And also, another thing, could it maybe be interpreted as a feminist approach, even though Tapta never explicitly identified herself as a feminist?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question.
Yes, and maybe several questions. Just,
I think
curious
that,
about
well,
your
first
view.
of all, to say this phrase of sculpting feeling was really her. It came from her words. So she said in an interview, I mostly sculpt in feelings. So I've just kind of taken that beautiful phrase and, you know, extrapolated it and expanded on it in my text. But it's her, those are her words. And I think I was interested in thinking about because in English we talk about feeling something is this act of touching, you know, you're feeling the surface of a textile, or you're feeling something is doing this, you know. But it's also the emotional response that arises in you, and the connection of that word, and also movement, being moved by something, we talk about as being, you know, having an emotional response. But of course, the movement that comes into her, there is a kind of movement that's implied by interacting with sculptural forms as well. It has to allow for the movement of the body of the visitor or the viewer, or even, you know, the artist in making the object in the first place. There is also an implied movement there. And I think that when you encounter a work like Tapta's, even if we're no longer allowed, you know, we were talking about how people feel like they want to sit in the cocoons, even if they can't, even if they're not allowed to anymore. I think that we are able to imagine what it might mean to make that form, and to think about making that form, and think, you know, what would you be required to do? I mean, it's difficult sometimes to imagine the weight of something until you actually lift it or touch it. But the way that it's been structurally created, there's a kind of movement that goes into that making. In the making, there's a movement as well. So I think that all of these things come together, and it's something that interests me very much about how textile, what is it about textile in particular, and the creation of textiles or textile techniques, or using those techniques, that speaks really to a kind of feeling, a kind of emotional response. It might be, you know, Marta was referring to the fact that through our lives, you know, from the beginning to the end, we're in physical contact with textiles right from the start and right to the end of our lives. Our bodies are clothed in textiles. We sleep in textiles. You know, we have this intimacy with fabrics, with materials. And that may have something to do with it. But also it's embedded into the language, you know, so this connection with emotion and with feeling and with movement. And I think, I mean, you know, I've also been thinking and writing in various ways about the connection between women and fibre and textiles, you know, why it is that so many women chose to do weaving, or maybe they didn't choose it, maybe it was something that was chosen for them, but it's become or had become associated with a female form of creativity. And huge generalizations here without getting into long and complicated histories, but and therefore, you know, fibre and textiles were adopted, of course, by second wave feminists in the 60s. So, you know, Tapta, I'm sure, would also have been fully aware of, you know, what was happening in the west coast of the US with people like Faith Wilding and others who were due to Chicago. We can think of these artists who at the same time, you know, this is a kind of parallel history of creating work with textile and with fibre, but with a more overt political agenda. And I mean, I suppose the artists like who were more closely associated with fibre art, so, you know, Abakanowicz, Sheila Hicks, Tapta, Buić, they didn't identify themselves necessarily as feminists in that kind of, they didn't make work with that feminist agenda in the same way. But that, of course, doesn't mean that it can't be read by us through a feminist lens, and it can't be interpreted through a feminist lens. And so I think, you know, whatever the intention of the work, there are ways of reading it through thinking about a form of creativity that's been available to women and that has been used by women for really centuries. Yes, for both practical and creative reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. In texts about Tapta's work and interviews with her, Tapta's materials and the scale of her works are frequently linked to her time in Congo during the 1950s and her close encounter with Congolese and more broadly Central African culture. And I'd like to mention here Sarah van Beurden's contribution to our book. She's a professor of history and African American and African studies at Ohio State University, who unfortunately could not attend the symposium, but has provided a profound and illuminating analysis on how Tapta's life and work intersect with larger forces of colonialism, a challenging task, particularly due to the limited sources available on Tapta's time in Congo. I highly recommend reading her article for a deeper understanding, but I also want to bring it to the table here, and maybe I'd like to address this question to Marta. How do you interpret this connection between Tapta's work and Congo, for instance, regarding the use of sisal in the early 1970s? Do you see this as an appropriated material from Africa, or might that perspective be too narrow? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, I think. Yeah, I read this article, Sarah article, and it's really, really very interesting. I don't feel like an expert of African art. But I was thinking about it, of course. It's a pity that we have not so many. We don't have so many information about this period. Even Tapta didn't say a lot about it, so it's really a pity, because when I look at her work, I can see some influences. I think that I can imagine that when she went after very difficult period in Poland, after uprising and after her fighting in Warsaw Uprising, I can imagine that this proposition to go to Africa and to Congo, for her, it can be like some kind of escaping. I think that in Congo, she could find some kind of freedom. And I think that in her work, we can see the monumental scale, like in an African forest. I think that some kind of spontaneous in her work. We know that she started to experiment with textile in this period. So I think it was very important for her because after studied, in this European Western tradition, she could discover totally different expressions. So I can see in her work from 70s, some kind of magical energy. The same I can see in Wojciech Sadlej's works. Of course, it's different, but I think that it's another element of materiality, that every material has her own spirit. I think that for artists it was very important, because even Tapta told that she rather would like to follow by material to feel the structure, and I think that her work was very with deep understanding of material. And I would like to refer to Anne's words about men and women connecting with textile. I think that, of course, Western European tradition is connected with men's work because of big royal manufacturers, master weavers. But I think that such a kind of creativity is very logical, technical. They focus how to translate language, translated painting language for tapestry to tapestry. And I think that when women started to be interested in such a kind of creativity, they more were focused on materiality. It was more connected with touching, with experiences, with feelings, and I can see such a things in Tapta. And of course, I would like to mention about Sisal, because it was your question. It's not so easy, I think, because she started to use Sisal after her participation in Biennale in Lausanne after 69. And as Anne told, at that edition in Lausanne, Magdalena Abakanowicz showed a very big, monumental, powerful piece, Red Abakan, made by Sisal. And another Polish artist, Maria Teresa Chojnacka, made her pieces from monochromatical Sisal too. But I think that the nature of this material can be inspired for Tapta because of her raw nature. And I think that, of course, it can be connected with her experiences from Congo. But I think that it's more complicated, and it's more connected with exploring new ways of expression, exploring new ways of language of textiles.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was also thinking with what you said to some elements that Sarah is mentioning in her text. For example, that she thinks that instead of looking at local textile or tapestry weaving practices in Congo at that time, in the 50s, Tapta was more interested in objects for daily use, you know, like, and she saw parallels, something that I didn't see at first, but then when she wrote about it, I obviously saw it. Parallels with the creation of baskets or fishing nets, for example, rather than the references of tapestry. And something else that more refers to a later development in her work is the introduction of water surfaces that are reflecting. This for Sarah van Beurden was really obvious that it must have been, or it can be reflected in the experience of the huge water surfaces in Congo, where she was living. I see Veronica nodding. I don't know if you could maybe say something about this. Did you talk about it ever, about this experience of the Congo, or not?
Yes, we talked just a little bit because it's another period of her life. But at the time, she was very interested by the traditional art, also from velour, Kasai velvet, and you know the structure of the Kasai velvet. And she at that time she produced, as you mentioned, daily object, you know, useful daily object. Also in sisal at the time, she was working with those materials. Then, but she produced, but not so much. But I'm sure that the rope, you know, there's a connection with the body of the snake, the generosity of the trees and the nature, the environment, and also you mentioned this water surface, which is existed, the area where she was, where the sun is very active, and you say later she connect artificial light and water deep, water long, a large surface of water. And there is connection, and also this idea of intensity, which is crossing where her work comes in.
Yeah.
But we don't speak too much about that period because she at that time she had to take care of her 3 children. Yeah, and then she produced, but really less. And when she come back from to Belgium, her husband was sick. Then she started to work to get money for the family by weaving, and then starting to develop also sculptural work, but also like pieces like shawl and something. Some
garments to wear.
Would help the family also at the period when her husband was not able to work.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit about Tapta's teaching, because I think it's a very important aspect of her practice as well. And Veronica, let's start with you, of course, since you were her student and you have already mentioned something before. But Tapta had a compelling vision of what art teaching should be, focusing not so much on mastering techniques, but on cultivating students' openness to the world. Could you share maybe something more about your experience with her teaching and explain why she was such a significant influence on you?
Yeah, with pleasure. As you may know, Tapta's teaching was very experimental. Her atelier and Jean-Gilbert atelier were the 2 most experimental ateliers at that school at that time. And although at the beginning some students were still practicing the art of weaving and tapestry, she encouraged us to work first on the concept and then to invent and propose our own techniques. By her personality, there was a lot of vitality and joy at the atelier, but a lot of requirement and openness on the part of Tapta when it came to our experiment. She encouraged us to search depending the intention, to search our own material, to learn and manipulate it, to understand and experiment it better. She encouraged our curiosity, the sense of necessity, and the need for the essential, which is also part of her work. She was also committed to her students and encouraged them beyond the confines of the studio by introducing other opportunities. They were already professional. As well, she organized collective meetings with key players of the artistic scene. Also, she brought us to event exhibition. I remember she bring us to see Shelaix in Paris or Abakanowicz or somewhere, artists from that generation. Then she shared her enthusiasm. Her method consists of encouraging personal research and leaving us free to experiment, and then coming back to her for an in-depth discussion on the proposal. The context in which the project was set, the research, and encouraging to find the right material and the technique best suited to the intention, to our intention. Her teaching gave me immediate autonomy, and already during my study, I was able to share and exhibit my work in the underground or professional art world. She was certainly a model of independence and commitment, of demanding quality work. She was also always at the side of young students and artists, encouraging them and helping them to find interesting opportunities. When she died, I dreamed of creating a scholarship for young artists in her memory, but technically and financially that wasn't possible. Her generous encouragement to young artists was a remarkable example of her personality.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Veronica, for this testimony. Maybe Greet, I want to ask you, you're also an artist and a teacher. Did your research on Tapta and her teaching approach inspire or influence your own teaching practices in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I even would look like her, even for a tiny bit. And as Veronica says, I think Tapta, when it comes to her teaching, she was way ahead of her time. She's not imposing techniques on her students. She stimulates them to visit expos or theater plays. She helps them finding their own voice in their works, which is marvelous. I was studying in the 90s, and I think my education was way more traditional than what Tapta did before. So I still try to do and copy what Tapta was doing 50 years ago. Absolutely. And teaching is very difficult, and teaching art is maybe even more. And Tapta really inspires me also in doing projects like she did with her student, like the spontaneous structure she made in 78, I think. And it's a structure that was made also outside of the art institution with her students, and it was made for children. Yeah, I think she was really ahead of her time, and I hope a lot of teachers will be inspired by her methods. Absolutely.
Great. Maybe to conclude, because I think we're approaching the end of our conversation time, I'd like to discuss Tapta's departure from textile art and her transition in the late 1970s to even more spatial works, including her architectural installations with ropes and cables stretching across walls and vaults. It's a topic that Virginie Mamet will explore in her lecture this afternoon. And eventually her shift to neoprene sculptures. Maybe first I address the question to Veronica. Around 1985-87, I think Tapta relocated her studio from her home to an industrial building on Avenue du Midi in Brussels. I think you said in the beginning of the conversation that you weren't there anymore. You weren't her assistant anymore or student anymore when she moved away from her home and installed her studio elsewhere in quite a big industrial place. But of course you were still around, and I imagine in her proximity. Do you say that? And I wonder, how did you view this shift in her practice, moving from textiles to neoprene? How did you understand it?
Yes, but during her life, she has some very strong and difficult experience, which she has always overcome with ever greater energy and determination. And for her work, Tapta express, that's her word, the desire to break away from everything we've learned and perhaps even from ourselves. And I think it's really significant of this new generation of work. She was still looking for energy, tension, intensity. And we produced some of her first works, rubber and neoprene work, such as the monumental elastic structure. The one was shown at the Tapestry Biennale we installed there. We produced different of the early work, and then we stopped. But we visit many times. The studio at Boulevard du Midi, and later she had another atelier near my home. And until her sudden death, she was completely involved in her research and future projects, and also generously concerned by the work of the young artist.
Great, great. So always in search for innovation within her own practice.
Their own practice.
Yeah. And Marta and Anne, maybe one last question. How do you interpret this change? Does it seem logical to you within the context of Tapta's practice? Or can you also observe similar trends in other art practices? I wonder, was fiber art past its peak in general, maybe at that time?
I think that it was a natural process. Because as I mentioned, Tapta was focused on materiality, and she would like to discover what this material can tell her. So I think that some of the avant-garde artists like Abakanowicz or Tapta might be just a bit disappointed that after 2 decades of exploring this environment, textile started to be more focused on formal aspects. And I think that these 2 artists treated textile like a medium, not only like a discipline. So they would like to grow up. They would like to go further, and they would like to explore different areas of contemporary art. Because they treated textile like a very important element, like a tool in artist hands. So I think that it was a natural process to explore different materials, different shapes, and this not only the element of materiality was important, but connected to space, to create a new spaces, new words. So yes, so I think that it was very important to Tapta.
I think that's very well articulated, Marta. I think their disappointment with the discipline of textiles, because these were ambitious artists who were expressing feeling and ideas through the medium of fiber. But I think that the kind of the dialogue or the context that surrounded textiles was limiting to them, and they got fed up with being called textile artists instead of just artists. These were artists who were using a particular medium. So I think for me, yes, it's a logical step of her ambition and her wanting to create works in public space for dialogue, to really explore the material and the way that it articulates space and the way that it can be interacted with people in a public realm. It seems like a logical step. but also for me, I mean, I think we're now at a stage where we've moved beyond some of those dialogues that were happening about, you know, the limiting dialogues about textiles, and many artists are rediscovering fibre and textiles as a medium to use amongst many others. And I think for me, for this reason particularly, I really want to rescue the hairy fibre art from the 70s and to say, look, this was great art, you know, actually. Like, forget all the stuff about what we think about, you know, the discipline or the medium of textiles or fibre or the context that it was interpreted in at the time. Let's move beyond that and let's look at it again with fresh eyes and see how relevant it still is to us.
Right.
Yes, if I can, I would like to add that Abakanowicz, I think, because in my text I quote Abakanowicz's word, and I think that they express in a perfect way the situation, because Anna Abakanowicz told that her work, Wheel and a Rope, in Biennale in Lausanne, was treated like a textile, and in National Gallery in Berlin with works with Joseph Beuys were treated like a conceptual art, and the audience was different. So I think that the audience was very important for both artists, that they didn't want to be they didn't want to have a label like a textile artist, I think. So they would like to be the part of a contemporary artists, contemporary art and practices.
Yeah, thank you. And in this way, it's very nice that we see that both of these artists and other fiber artists are being rediscovered and now shown in the contemporary art world, yes, and can be very inspiring, I think, also to the current generation of artists and the public like this. So I think this is a nice note to end the conversation. I think it was a very warm and interesting conversation. Thank you so much, all of you, Greet, Anne, Marta, and Veronica. Thank you so much for being here, and see you around.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.